Hello and welcome back to Photo 143. This is your instructor, Jason Reimer. In this video, I'm going to be explaining differences in quality of light and showing how it affects your subject matter in a scene. We're going to look at several different examples, and I'll try to break down exactly what's happening. And the goal for this is to train you to see differences in the quality of light and the direction of light and how that affects your images. You'll want to take notes as we go through this video because, as you'll see, often, probably in most if not all of your images, there may be one quality of light that predominates, but there's usually several other things happening at the same time. So I'm just going to go through a selection of different kinds of images I've shot over the years and just try to break down what it is that you're seeing. Let's start with this one. This was I did some work for a chain of athletic clubs, and we did some shots with their trainers and some of their staff to advertise their training services and some of their amenities. So let's look at this image. In this image, we're seeing mostly lights that are coming from the sides. We can tell by the shadows. We've got one coming from this side. You can see the way we have the highlight on the bridge of his nose and this little triangle here on his cheek. So we can see that there's a light that's just off over here. But when we look at the shadows on the fabric of his shirt here, we can tell that there's also one coming from about the same direction this way. So they're kind of opposite each other from the sides. And there's a little bit of light coming from up here, the ambient light, but I actually tried to kind of darken that, make this more dramatic than it really would be. Another thing you'll notice about this is that when you look at the shadows, they're relatively hard-edged. You look at how defined these are. This is a giveaway that this is hard light as well. If you go outside and look at anything lit by the sun on your average sunny day, the shadows are generally crisp enough that you could just pull out a Sharpie and draw an outline around the shadows. That was what I wanted to use for this because the priority was on showing the definition in these athletes' muscles. If you're going to hire a personal trainer, generally I think you want to hire somebody that looks like they practice what they preach, so to speak. So in this case, it was kind of that was our priority. Let's look at another. Similar thing going on here. If we look at the shadows, these are pretty hard-edged and defined. We can see the shadow on this plate here that's really defined and crisp. Same here. And on his face as well. We have a few different things going on here. He's being lit from behind by the sun that's coming through this opening here. But there's also a light we can tell by the direction of the shadow. There's a light coming from just out of the frame over here. And then there's another one kind of the opposite side of it coming in from here. So we can see there's a light hitting his face here and here. And they're far apart enough from each other that they don't quite overlap here, which was what I wanted. I wanted to emphasize the bone structure in his face. His cheekbones and his jawline here. So there's two strobes, two studio strobes, as well as the sun here. All of them hard light. And so we have kind of a combination of sort of side light. It's shifted around, maybe about 3/4 behind him and about 1/4 out this way. But roughly opposite each other, plus the backlight from the sun. This one here, he's being lit pretty frontally by the sun. You see the shadow on his face. There's just a small one here under and around his nose. It's very crisp. We look at here, the shadow from his chin and his jaw is very crisp also. When we connect this to his chin, this is what's casting the shadow, and here's the shadow. When we kind of connect these, we can guess that the sun is pretty high. But if you notice, we also have a highlight here on the side of his face, around this side of him. I had another light over here off to the side to fill the shadow a little bit, but also to get him to really pop out from this background and just to, again, get definition in his muscles. So this was all about understanding how the light would affect texture. When you think of driving down a dirt road at night, when you have your headlights on, if there's any washboard on the road, you can see every little pebble, every little ripple in the road, whereas if you're out at noon, and the angle of the sun relative to what you're looking at kind of erases all of that texture. So here, the sun shining directly into his face, you don't see the texture quite as much, but the light coming from the side makes the muscles in his abdomen and in his shoulders and his arms here that's being hit from the side, it makes that stand out. We can see something similar happening here, the light coming from this side. There's a strobe here, there's one that's kind of off to the right, and we also have the sun up here. You can see this shadow. It's the primary shadow, it's the darkest one. This is coming from the sun. But we've also got one coming this direction from this light. And you can see a little bit of a shadow here and here. Also on him here. It's from this light hitting from here. So we've got 3 lights again. The idea is to make them separate from the background, emphasize the texture in their garments and in their muscles here, get some definition going. If we were taking a portrait of someone with this kind of light from the side, you have to understand what this is going to do to texture. So from the side, it's going to exaggerate texture. The more frontal the light becomes, the more it kind of erases that texture. So if you had somebody who had very weathered skin and they were self-conscious about it, you probably would not want to put your light off to the side because it would really highlight that texture. You'd want to put the light coming in more from the front and use a softer quality of light, not this hard light like I'm using, and it would be a little more gentle on that. Whereas if you wanted to make a portrait of somebody, and let's say you wanted to make them look very rugged, then you would want to emphasize that texture, so you would put the lights off somewhat to the side. Here's another example, kind of the same idea as far as my lighting style. What we can see here right off the bat, we've got this big bright window light that's backlighting her. And we can see it's relatively soft. You look at the shadows around these machines here, they're not very well defined. We can make out shapes, but they're not very crisp. Here, this shadow is getting a lot more definition to it, but that's because I've got a strobe that's off to the side here. I've also got another here that I left in the frame, so you can see it's not quite from the side, but it's much closer to being straight on from the side than this window light is here. So what that's doing is creating this rim of light on her leg. We've got some from the other light hitting here and on her hair also, so this gets her to separate from the background. We can see some definition in her muscles. But we also have some mood and some atmosphere created by this backlight from the window. I also left my shutter open a little bit longer so that we get a little bit of motion here. She was just going through some leg presses, and I wanted to capture a little bit of that motion there, give it a feeling of some energy. But again, we have 2 hard lights and 1 soft light. So we're kind of blending them for something with a unique look to it. In this example, this was at Mission Trails. It was on a gloomy, overcast day with really flat, dull light. You can see a little bit of the sky back there. That was about as interesting as it ever got. So I mostly tried to frame it out, but I did use some of it. I let some of it color the scene here, but primarily it's being lit by a strobe right off to the side here. And by bringing it in from the side, if you recall what that does to texture, it makes all the texture in this grass and in the branches just really pop out. So we can tell whether it's coming from this side by the highlight on this side. It's very thin. And then we have some shadowing on the opposite side of it. This helps accentuate the texture and make it feel a little bit more dimensional. This was shot on 35mm color slide film. And so you can see there's kind of a mix of the light here was the white balance of the lights matches the white balance of the film. So the color temperature of the lights matching the white balance of the film. But the ambient light, because it's quite a bit cooler than the white balance of the film, that's what gives it sort of this bluish purple cast in here, which I actually happen to like. Here's a different angle so you can see the sky really didn't have a whole lot going on up here. It's pretty flat. But down here where our strobe is, this is really helping define things and making all of this pop out versus here it's just kind of a silhouette with a little bit of color in it. Now if we drop a person into this scene, and I made the ambient light a little darker in this by going with a faster shutter speed, but it's still, we've got a strobe off to the side here, lighting him here. Another off to the side here. This time I put a blue gel on it, but this is really helping separate him from the background. Gives him a little bit more shape and dimension. You get this really cool highlight around his eye. His eye is picking it up here. But again, this is 2 hard lights, plus a little bit of ambient soft light from that overcast sky. Let's go to our next image. Something very different. This is at one of those athletic clubs I was shooting for. This is downtown, right outside of Petco Park, you can see here. And it's just hard direct sunlight coming from right out this way. So maybe about off to my right, kind of right off my right shoulder. It's very hard light, really nice, crisp, hard shadows on it, which is great for architecture. Makes it more bold and kind of graphic as far as composition goes. Then if I turn, this is 90 degrees from my left, just turning from here to here, just turning to the left 90 degrees. This was off over my left shoulder. Here we can see the sun is hitting it here, but there's also, we have some shadows going on. It's getting down low enough that it's there's sun here, but we also have shadows from some of the buildings back here. So you can see it's beginning to have a different feel. We have a mix of softer light from the shade, but there's still some hard light hitting up here in the background, and then we've got a lot of kind of dark shadows inside here. So just when you find something that's interesting to you, shoot it from multiple sides. We'll see more examples of that, of how something looks different depending on the angle that you're shooting it from. You could have the same light source, but depending on what angle you are relative to your subject, it can look very different. Here's an example of soft light. It's coming in through a window. It's softened in 2 ways. It's softened in that it's not direct sunlight. The sun is actually on the other side of the house that I was shooting this in. So it's not directly coming in the window, straight from the sun through the window. It's indirect, but it's also diffused. There were really thin drapes that were further softening the light. You can see if you look in her eye, this little square highlight, that's the highlight of the window. I further softened it by using just a piece of white foam core right out of the frame to bounce this light into the shadow side of her face. So you can see there's another white square there. That's my reflector that's filling this in. So we can see this is the brighter side of her face. This side's darker, but not by very much. So it's very low contrast look, very delicate, that I thought was appropriate to the subject matter here. So this is an example of soft light. It's coming from the side, but because it's so soft, we don't really have to worry about what it's doing with texture. We're actually pretty good here. Her skin looks smooth, but we can still see some sharpness in her hair and in the garment. So we'll pick up where we left off in the next video. I'm going to go through several more examples, just explain what the angle of the light, more about the quality of light, what that will do to your image. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.